Naive realism regards the sensory experiences that subjects enjoy when perceiving, that I will refer to as perceptual experiences, as being, in some sense, presentational of the objects of perception. In enjoying a perceptual experience, a subject stands in a relation to the thing that they perceive, such that the subjective aspect of their experience, the peculiar way in which the subject has appeared to on such an occasion, is constituted by the very things that they perceive. Now, it's frequently argued that this naive realist view of the nature of perceptual experience requires one to adopt disjunctivism about experience. In order to accommodate the possibility of hallucinatory experiences that are subjectively indiscriminable from perceptual experiences, I shall refer to these from now on as perfect non-perceptual experiences, the naive realist must maintain that such non-perceptual experiences are of a fundamentally different nature to those that occur when perceiving. Or, in any case, that's how the argument goes. Now, it's my intention in this paper to argue that the possibility of such perfect non-perceptual experience need not compel a naive realist to adopt a disjunctive conception of experience. Instead, they can maintain that the intrinsic nature of perceptual and non-perceptual experience is the same, while still claiming that perceptual experience is presentational of the objects of perception. On this view, the difference between perceptual and non-perceptual experience will lie in the nature of the objects that are so presented in experience. This is to adopt a disjunctivism about the objects of experience, about that which is apparently present in experience, rather than the nature of experience itself. Now, there are two immediate problems for this line of thought. First, we end up with a picture of the objects of experience, of those things that are apparently presented to us in experience, in cases of perfect non-perceptual experience, as being both actual and mind-independent. So not only is there a genuine existing entity to which one is related in experience, but that entity does not depend for its existence upon that act of awareness. And it may be objected that this picture is just too implausible to accept, given what we know about how such experiences can be brought about. Secondly, if we think that the physical basis of some non-perceptual experience is sufficient for the occurrence of the awareness of some entity, then a perceptual experience whose causal basis includes the whole of the causal basis of the non-perceptual experience, a causally matching perceptual experience, must involve awareness of the same kind of entity. But how could this be consistent with supposing that in the perceptual experience one is presented with things in the world? So the naive realist who accepts a common view of the nature of perceptual and non-perceptual experience faces the problem of explaining how what is in common between the two cases does not get in the way or screen off the objects that we perceive from being what one is most immediately aware of. So I'm going to outline the sort of strategy that the naive realist needs to adopt. But before I do that, I need to assess the reasons for thinking that the naive realist must reject a common view of the nature of perceptual and non-perceptual experience. And I will then go on to reject those reasons. So, the naive realist conception of the nature of perceptual experience doesn't automatically rule out a conception of non-perceptual experience according to which it shares the same nature, according to which it has the same metaphysical makeup. I mean, there's no inconsistency in supposing that both perceptual and non-perceptual experiences have the same kind of nature. So, by fundamental nature, I mean that which makes the experience, the experience that it is, its essence. Now, according to the naive realist, what makes a perceptual experience an experience is the subject of the experience standing in a special relation to some object, the relation of acquaintance or apprehension. What makes it a perceptual experience is the fact that this object is something in the world. Now, if the naive realist also thought that what makes a hallucinatory experience, a non-perceptual experience, the experience that it is the subject of the experience standing in the same relation, the very same relation of acquaintance or apprehension, to some entity, then they are conceiving of hallucinatory experience as having the same fundamental nature as perceptual experience. And what would make the experience hallucinatory would not be anything about the nature of the experience, but would in fact be something about the kind of entity to which the subject was related in experience. The fact that there's no immediate conflict between naive realism and giving a common account of perceptual and non-perceptual experience is not widely recognized. And this is probably because it seems incredible to most people that a story could be given of the nature of hallucination that could generalize to perception in a way that does not threaten naive realism. Nevertheless, the possibility is there. Now, to conceive of the difference in the nature of perceptual and hallucinatory experience to lie in a difference in the nature of the object that's presented in such experiences is to adopt what we can refer to as disjunctivism about the objects of experience. Mike Martin has argued that the naive realists cannot avail themselves of this sort of disjunctivism. And his reasons are as follows. So, on the slide here, whatever kind of thing perceptual experience is, hallucinatory experience is also that kind of thing. This is the common kind assumption. Secondly, experiences are part of the natural causal order, subject to broadly physical and psychological causes. So we can call this experiential naturalism. And the thought is that these two claims are inconsistent with the third claim that perceptual experience is a relation between a subject and a mind-independent object, which is the central naive realist thesis. And this is because the second claim, the claim of experiential naturalism, commits us to rejecting hallucinatory experience as a relation to a mind-independent object. So, by the common kind assumption, whatever kind of thing perceptual experience is, hallucinatory experience is also that kind of thing. If perceptual experience were a relation to a mind-independent object, then so too would hallucinatory experience. But hallucinatory experience is not a relation to a mind-independent object, because such a conception would conflict with a commitment to experiential naturalism. So, naive realism must be false. As experiential naturalism is not easily contestable, to respond to this argument, the naive realist must reject the first claim, the common kind assumption, and in doing so adopt disjunctivism about experience. Let us look at the argument for why Martin doesn't take it to be plausible that non-perceptual experience could be a relation to a mind-independent object, to an entity whose existence is independent of the active awareness of that entity. First, such a position maintains that non-perceptual experience is relational, and if this is the case, then it is a necessary condition for the obtaining of non-perceptual experience that there is some object to which the subject is related. Second, The commitment to experiential naturalism commits us to the thought that manipulation of the visual system is sufficient to bring about a sensory experience. So, if neural stimulation is sufficient for the occurrence of a non-perceptual experience, let us say as of an object with a certain character, and the existence of something that appears to have that character is necessary for the experience, then it must be the case that whenever the neural stimulation obtains, this entity obtains, this object obtains. Now, Martin identifies three possible ways of cashing out this idea, and rejects all of them. The first possibility is that there is a multitude of non-perceptual objects, such that whenever a subject is caused to have a suitable pattern of neuronal excitation, there is always a non-perceptual object of the right sort for him to be related to. The objection to this is that it should be ruled out on the grounds of its extravagance in postulating a non-perceptual object of every kind that there could be in every location that there could be, thus guaranteeing that whenever the neural excitation occurred, there would be an object available to be apprehended. The second option is that non-perceptual objects might prevent the neural stimulation that would result in an experience in all situations in which there were no non-perceptual object appropriately placed. And the third option is that the obtaining of the neural excitation, as well as being sufficient for the obtaining of a non-perceptual experience, causes the obtaining of the non-perceptual object of that experience. Both of these possibilities are questionable on the grounds that they posit causal relations between perceptual and non-perceptual objects that we have no supporting evidence for, other than the need to preserve a conception of non-perceptual experience as a relation to such objects. So the thought here is that if there are non-normal objects of non-perceptual experience, then the postulation that they are dependent upon non-perceptual experience is all that is reasonably supported by what we know about the world. To claim that they are experience independent is to go further than we need to, given that we know that neural stimulation is sufficient for non-perceptual experience. The evidential basis for possibilities 2 and 3 are just too shallow to warrant accepting them. So, the simplest, most parsimonious account to give is one in which the objects of experience depend for their existence upon the experience. Other accounts, while not being impossible, are more extravagant in postulating causal relations between normal and non-normal objects, or more extravagant in postulating a vast number of non-normal objects in every place that there could be. If we are trying to explain the apparent relationality of non-perceptual experience, given what we know about how such experiences can come about, we should consider such experience as either a relation to a mind-dependent object, or not relational at all. It just appears relational. So as I say, this line of reasoning leaves the naive realist with two options. The first is to maintain that hallucination is a relational state of affairs, but of a very different kind to that involved in their conception of perceptual experience. In hallucinatory experience, the object is constituted, in some sense, by the relation in which the subject stands to it. In the perceptual case, the object is independent of this relation. So, it is not really the same relation in both cases. And we have two kinds of experience with a fundamentally different nature. The second option is to reject the idea that hallucination is relational. Either way, in doing so, the naive realist has denied the common fundamental nature of perceptual and hallucinatory experience. Now, I want to reject this line of reasoning. I want to argue that experiential naturalism does not force a certain view of the nature of non-perceptual experience. And so the naive realist is not compelled to adopt disjunctivism about experience. First of all, I want to point out that perfect non-perceptual experience will seem presentational upon reflection, as it is subjectively indiscriminable from perceptual experience. In perceptual experience, it seems to us as if we are presented with some item in an ontologically immediate way. When one hallucinates, and one is unable to discriminate one's experience from perceptual experience, then such experience will also appear presentational, or else it will be discriminable from perceptual experience. So, inasmuch as there is phenomenological support for perceptual experience being presentational, there will be support for perfect non-perceptual experience being presentational. We might say that we have a naive conception of hallucination, and that a presentational construal of the nature of such experience is in accord with this conception that we achieve through phenomenological reflection. Now, if hallucinatory experience is presentational of some object, and hence relational, can we make sense of the thought that this object is dependent upon the very act of awareness of it? John Foster offers a rejection of the intelligibility of a state of affairs in which a genuine entity is present to a subject, but whose existence is not independent of this. We cannot make sense of this being a genuine relation between subject and object, for the object threatens to vanish into the experiential episode. So for a visual experience to be genuinely relational, the object of experience, that which is apparently present in experience in an immediate way, must have a, quote, form of existence which transcends its standing in that presentational relationship, end quote. He considers three ways in which we might make sense of the notion that the episode of awareness constitutes its object. Firstly, the existence of the object could be derived from its presentation to the experiencing subject. But of course this isn't any good, because this just assumes the existence of the object in providing an account of its existence. As Foster says, this possibility is manifestly incoherent. The second possibility is that the existence of the object and its presentation and experience are the same thing. The object of experience exists presentationally. It has its being in an act of awareness. But if this is so, does it really make sense to think that it is genuinely available as the object of the awareness, as that which the awareness is directed upon? And this is a really intuitive problem with this kind of account. If the experience is genuinely relational between subject and some object, then how can that object's very nature be bound up with the act of awareness, given that it stands over and against this act? And the last alternative is that we might think the object of experience and the presentational episode as both being constituted by some other, more fundamental psychological fact. But this would mean that the account of experience as a relation to a mind-dependent object is not going to get to grips with what the fundamental nature of experience really is. The basic nature of experience would be given by an account of what this mysterious further psychological episode is. And so we haven't really provided an account of the nature of the experience. Now, it might be thought that even if there is introspective evidence for causally matching perfect non-perceptual experience being presentational and hence relational in nature, and even if a relational conception of such causally matching hallucination requires us to think of the objects of such experiences as being mind-independent, nevertheless, if such a position violates our commitment to experience as being part of the natural causal order, then we must reject one of the two claims that has led us to this violation. Either such experience is not relational and experiences are misleading, or there is some way of making good the thought that experience can be genuinely relational even though the objects of that experience depend for their existence upon it. Now, it seems clear that neither of the first two strategies that Martin considers are satisfactory. Recall the first strategy was to claim that every kind of non-normal object was located at every possible point in space, such as to ensure that whenever neural excitation sufficient for the occurrence of an experience with a certain character occurred, there would be an object for the subject to stand in relation to. Now that seems clearly ontologically extravagant. And the second seemed unsatisfactory because of its claim of there being a causal interaction between non-normal objects and the physical world, in the sense that they would have to play a role in preventing the obtaining of the physical conditions that would be sufficient for the generation of a visual experience with a certain character. In any situation in which there is no suitable non-normal object for one to be aware of. The third strategy that Martin considers, however, is by no means as unpalatable as the others. According to this picture, the physical basis of a causally matching perfect non-perceptual experience brings into existence the object of that experience, which is then sensed by the subject. And I think that the postulation of this kind of causal relation is not as objectionable as that of the previous claim. I mean, we should recognize that there is, at least on the face of it, nothing obviously implausible about the thought that objects of certain kinds can be generated out of, or depend for their existence upon, physical processes and events that are not parts of those objects. So one might take seriously, for example, the thought that virtual objects are genuine objects that depend for their existence upon the physical processes and states of the computer that we quite naturally think of generating. Of course, it is open to someone to argue that these are not genuine objects, perhaps along the lines that they don't exist independently of our awareness of them. But to advocate that virtual objects are genuine objects would not be to violate any naturalistic understanding of the world. Such objects would be firmly rooted within the natural causal order. They would depend for their existence and characteristics upon the operations of the computer that generates them. We could appeal to the notion of supervenience in order to reconcile the existence of such objects with naturalism. Virtual objects would then be conceived of as entities that supervene upon the physical realm. It seems then that here we have a case of it being at least plausible that we have a perfectly good example of entities of a certain category, in this case objects, being generated or brought about or depending upon physical goings on in the world in such a way that does not necessarily violate a naturalistic worldview. Okay, so now I just want to sum up the argument of this section. So we have reason to think that hallucination is presentational in nature, at least as much phenomenological support for thinking that as there is support for the thought that perception is presentational in nature. If hallucination is presentational in nature, and hence relational, then the objects presented in such experience must be mind-independent, at least in the sense that they are not dependent upon our awareness of them. And, in maintaining this, we need not be violating any commitment that we might have to experiential naturalism. So we have good reason for thinking that hallucination is presentational. We have good reason for thinking that if it is presentational, what is presented does not depend for its existence upon the act of presentation. And, were we to maintain this, we need not be violating any commitment to experiential naturalism. Now I want to discuss the common element problem for such a view. How can the naive realist understand the objects of causally matching perfect non-perceptual experience as being present when one enjoys a perceptual experience? David Smith expresses this worry as follows, quote, "If such stimulation, a replication of the stimulation that would occur in some perceptual experience, is regarded as causing a real entity or process to exist, it can hardly be supposed that giving this same type of stimulus one rather than another type of causal antecedent can annihilate or prevent occurrence of this sensory entity and the consequent awareness of it." But if the perceptual and non-perceptual experiences involve awareness of the same kind of entity, how can the naive realist maintain that perceptual experience is also an awareness of an entity that is a normal object in the world? The naive realist supposes that the object of experience in a perceptual experience is the object of perception. But how is this possible? If the object of experience in such a case is also the same kind of thing as the object of experience in a causally matching non-perceptual case, where this is not a normal object. Now note here that by object of experience we do not actually mean object in the weighty metaphysical sense of a property bearing particular. We just mean that which is apparently present in experience. Reflection upon experience leaves it open as to what metaphysical category the entity that is the object of experience belongs to. Otherwise, there would be a lot of metaphysical positions that would conflict with the apparent character of sensory experience. So, The naive realist can hope to solve the problem facing them by taking a particular stance as to the nature of the object of experience in the hallucinatory case. To illustrate this strategy, I will look at one particular way in which the naive realist can do this, that offers them a way of generalizing from the non-perceptual to a perceptual case. It consists in them conceiving of the object of experience in the hallucinatory case as an uninstantiated universal. Mark Johnston offers an account of the relation between perceptual and hallucinatory experience that can be adopted by the naive realist. The essence of his account is illustrated in the following passage. Quote, "Just as the constitutional basis for a hallucination can be a proper part of the constitutional basis of another subjectively indiscernible act of seeing, so also the objects of a hallucination can be proper parts of the object seen in another subjectively indiscernible act of seeing." And he fleshes this out in the following way. In enjoying a sensory experience, a subject is aware of a sensible profile. And this is a, quote, "complex, partly qualitative and partly relational property which exhausts the way the particular scene before your eyes is if your perceptual experience is veridical." So, end quote. So when one is perceiving the world, one is aware of the particulars that instantiate aspects of this profile. But when one is hallucinating, one is aware only of the sensible profile. One is aware of a complex of uninstantiated universals. Quote, "The objects of hallucination and the objects of seeing are in a certain way akin. The first are complexes of sensible qualities and relations, while the second are spatio-temporal particulars instantiating such complexes. When the visual system misfires, as in hallucination, it presents uninstantiated complexes of sensible qualities and relations. At least, complexes not instantiated there in the scene before the eyes." So the naive realist can say that one possibility, to help his account, is to conceive of the entities that are the objects of experience in the hallucinatory case as uninstantiated sensible profiles. And these entities are present when one perceives something. The same universals are present when we perceive as when we hallucinate in a causally matching case. But in the perceptual case, these universals are instantiated by the things we perceive. In hallucination, you are presented with a certain sort of entity, and in perception you are presented with the same sort of entity, but this time it is instantiated by a normal object. In the hallucinatory case, one is not presented with an object, understood as a bearer of properties. Rather, one is presented with a complex of properties. In the perceptual case, one is presented with a complex of properties and an object which bears or possesses these properties. And these properties that are in common between the perceptual and the non-perceptual case do not get in the way of the awareness of the object. They do not render the awareness of the object indirect. We are not aware of the object in the world by being aware of the universals that instantiate, in the way that we are aware of what is going on in a television studio by being aware of the images on our television screens. Now, I want to finish by talking about a general worry with this strategy, in that it requires the naive realist to make substantial metaphysical claims. For example, it commits the naive realist to there being uninstantiated universals, a position that is certainly not universally acknowledged. So we might think that any adequate conception of the nature of perceptual experience should be one that does not require any specific story about what kinds of entity that there are in the universe. The appeal to such a metaphysics to make the naive realist position work might strike us as ad hoc. But the naive realist could respond to this by pointing out that a metaphysical response here is appropriate, because what it is that they are presented with is a metaphysical challenge. How can the nature of the object of experience, in causally matching perfect non-perceptual experience, be such that its presence in perceptual experience does not prevent the object of perception in such cases from being the object of experience? To which they answer, the nature of the object of experience in the perceptual case is an instantiated universe, and in the non-perceptual case, an uninstantiated. Given the failure of this argument, the naive realist can claim that it is a difference in the kinds of object presented in the non-perceptual and perceptual cases that makes a difference. Utilizing Johnson's account, they can claim that in the non-perceptual case, one is aware of a complex of uninstantiated universals. In the perceptual case, one is aware of the very same universals, but this time they are instantiated by objects that are present in experience. And in doing so, they can avoid the objection that what is in common between the perceptual and non-perceptual cases gets in the way of what is special about the perceptual case. Perceptual experience is still a presentation of the objects of perception.